But first, as I mentioned, I would like to mention also the organizations which helped us to put this event together, which is Untitled Stiftung, also Open Europe Berlin, and last but not least, the Czech-German Fund for Future. Very well. Now it's the turn that I introduce the three distinguished speakers who are at the panel and who will mainly engage in this discussion on the asylum policy. I will start with Roland Freudenstein, who is on my right, who represents the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies. Roland is head of research and also deputy director of the political foundation affiliated to the European People's Party. Has many experiences in European politics and international relations. And knows the region of Central Europe quite well, having been director of the office of Konrad Adenauer Stiftung in Warsaw. On my immediate left is Markus Benes, who is actually member of the cabinet of the Austrian Minister for Europe Integration and Foreign Affairs, the famous Sebastian Kurz. And Mr. Benes has been working with Mr. Kurz also since the time Mr. Kurz was the first State Secretary for Integration, and we have just reminded ourselves that 1 year ago we had a discussion about integration policy and about the experiences Czech Republic can gain from the reforms which took place in Austria. But now maybe even more pressing are issues related to migration, but these are extremely interlinked. So we are really grateful that Mr. Benes took his time and is here with us. And last but not least, it's my great pleasure to welcome among us Mr. Christoph Bender, who is Deputy Chairman of the European Stability Initiative, who is based in Vienna, and who has extensive experience, especially from Balkan, having lived in Balkan, and his institute and he himself specializes on issues of enlargement, on Eastern or Southeastern Europe relations with Turkey, and especially welcome will be his expertise on the EU-Turkish deal, which will definitely be also part of this discussion. So the title of this debate is European Refugee Crisis, is the relocation mechanism dead, and what next? But maybe we can discuss it also in relation to other related issues and questions. But first of all, I would like to ask Mr. Benes for his introductory remarks concerning this question of relocation mechanism. So, Dr. Benes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you all for coming. Thank all those who have made this meeting, this conference possible. Well, if someone working for the Austrian government with the family name Benes attending a conference in Prague is like a lost son coming home. Try to find his roots. So thank you very much for inviting me. Well, we just talked before about the last 12 months, and the last 12 months from our very Austrian point of view have been a very like an eternity, with a lot of dramatic events and a lot of dramatic developments. And 1 year ago there was the kind of sentiment, yes we can. Now we are in a position as national states, but also as a European Union, where we have to say it's not about if we can, we have to make it. We have simply no other choice. We've seen now by about since the beginning of the crisis 2 million people coming as refugees over the Mediterranean Sea, over Turkey, by Greece, to the European Union. And well, going back also to the question whether the mechanism Ministry for Foreign Affairs, so let me be a little bit diplomatic. Well, we maybe should look now for a different approach, because there were about 160,000 people. There was the agreement to relocate them. As far as we've seen, by about 5,000, 6,000 have been relocated all across Europe. And to maybe answer this question also from the Austrian point of view in advance, kind of punishment for those not taking the quotas and not taking certain amounts of refugees, as it has been mentioned by some departments and some politicians, that's something we will not support actually, because the European Union has been going through very, very difficult 12 months. And the worst thing we can do is right now is to punish some certain states or some groups within the European Union because of a very different approach regarding issues of politics. And so we come back to the problem maybe, which is from our point of view behind. Over the last years, regarding migration, Europe and some member states haven't been clear regarding the messages they sent to the regions where the refugees are coming from. There was some kind of invitation which was misused by smugglers, bringing a lot of people to Europe and causing all the challenges we are facing now, and which we'll be facing all across the next decades actually. What we need now is a totally different approach. We need to solve our problems as Europe, first of all, on our own. And we have to be very clear about the messages we send to all the people who need help, who want to apply for refuge. It's not about helping those who really need our help, but the one main question is, does it need to mean that these people come all directly to the center of Europe? Does it mean actually that they all are allowed to travel all across Europe in the moment they pass some borders into the European Union? From our point of view, that's a totally wrong message. What we need to do is right now, and it's also been mentioned in the documents prepared for this conference, is we need to be clear about saying that those who really need help need to get this help, but it doesn't mean actually that they have to come to Europe. And it doesn't actually has to mean that these people are allowed to go all across Europe. And we have to make it quite clear, all of those, and that's not what happened over the last 12 months actually, that we did not say precisely, we will help you, but this kind of help, this kind of assistance is no kind of carte blanche for coming to the European Union. And also by this clear message, we would make it possible for us to take over again the control over the issue of migration. Because right now, we are relying on partners, not part of the European Union, the agreement between Turkey and the European Union. And actually, we leave the business, we leave the policy to some certain extent to smugglers. That's totally wrong from our point of view. So we need to create centers, venues where these people can get help. We need to do more within the regions, but we also have to get clear about saying coming to Europe illegally will not mean actually that you are allowed to stay in Europe. That's the point.
Okay. Very good. Thank you very much for your clear introductory remarks. And now I would like to turn to Mr. Bender, who may actually follow up on the things which were mentioned, that we have to rely on our partners. We are now heavily relying on Turkey. The question is whether we can, within this, let's say, international management of migratory flows, not rely on our partners. And also there is a question whether we can really sustainably rely on partners such as Turkey. So, Mr. Bender, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you also for inviting me to participate in this debate, and good evening to everyone. taking up the debate, I want to make 3 points. On the refugee, the EU-Turkey deal, I think it is not being implemented. I think there's a serious risk that it could fail, and I think this could actually happen quite soon. Point 2, I think such a failure would be quite disastrous, not only for the countries concerned, but for Europe as a whole. And third, I would like to sketch very briefly a few points how could actually one avoid this. The underlying idea of this EU-Turkey deal, at the time when it was sort of sorted out a year ago at the height of the refugee crisis, was that it was central for Europe to gain control at the external borders, regain control of the external borders, but to do this in a way that is in agreement with international humanitarian law and in agreement with, how to say, humanitarian responsibility that the European Union is the richest area on this planet has. The idea was essentially simple. The idea was consisting of two basic parts. One is that Turkey would accept all the refugees which would cross over the Aegean to the Greek islands after procedures in Greece, and then would implement its asylum legislation, meaning that it would allow these people to apply for asylum or to be granted temporary protection. At the same time, that large numbers of refugees would be directly resettled from Turkey without the smugglers, without having them exposed to the Balkan route, but directly from Turkey with planes through EU member states. In big numbers on a voluntary basis. That was the basic idea. In March 2016, we had an agreement which sort of ran along these lines. I think it has been quite successful in bringing down the numbers, but it stands on extremely weak feet. The European Commission, in its latest assessment of the implementation of the deal, says, quote, the implementation of the EU-Turkey statement has continued to deepen and to accelerate. Now, I think this lies just in the face of facts, in the face of basic figures, even in the face of the figures the European Commission itself uses to describe the situation. Let me just illustrate this, but I think with 2 figures we can make this actually quite clear. At the moment, the number of people which are sent back from Greece to Turkey is 100 people a month. That was the average of the last half year, right? Now, the number of arrivals on the Greek islands currently has risen and now stands at more than 100 per day. But this balance, I think, is quite clear. So pressure is building up. More and more people end up on the Greek islands. The capacity there is about 7,500. We have now already more than 15,000 people on the islands. The number of people dealing with the asylum claims there is actually very low. The European Union has reduced its staff there to 41 member states experts, and the Greeks actually are very reluctant to say how many people they have on the islands, but what we are informally told is that they have also reduced the numbers. We have now 16 people on all of the Greek islands dealing with asylum cases from more than 15,000 people. 16, 1/6. So virtually we are not dealing with the issue. So the key elements of the deal, both resettlement in large numbers from Turkey directly to EU member states, and the idea of sending back asylum claimants from Greece to Turkey are actually not implemented. We don't know what will happen, but what I think is pretty clear is that if it continues like this, we have a serious risk that this actually could unravel actually very soon. Now there might be those who say, yes, okay, but even if, what's the big problem? We have the fences in the Balkans, we have Viktor Orban, so I think it would be disastrous. Let's just draw a little, scenario. What is likely to happen? Okay, let's say that the numbers on the Greek side will continue to rise by about 100 per day. That will mean that actually pretty soon the pressures on the Greek government to actually bring people from the Greek islands to the mainland will just rise. We've already a lot of social tensions on the islands. If this is going to happen, I think this is actually very likely to trigger even further flows of refugees from Turkey to the Greek island, because the idea is that it's moving again, so we can get there, we can move. On the mainland, the humanitarian situation, I think, already dire, already very problematic, would deteriorate further. The conditions will remain around that on the island, and it's very frustrating. We and my colleagues have been talking to quite a lot of refugees. They are now sitting in Athens, sitting at the airport. The Greek asylum system manages to process less than 1,000 full asylum claims per month. So, with 60,000 people already in Greece, even if not a single new migrant or refugee would come, it would take, at this pace, 5 years to resolve those which are currently dead. So more and more people would be stuck in Greece. And essentially, that's also what what politicians in the European Union actually say and see. Let's try to keep them in Greece. But of course, the pressure on the Greek-Macedonian border, I think, is very likely to increase quite clearly. We already have smuggling has been going up over the last month, already quite significantly. This will further grow. And I think the big risk is that if the Greek population and the Greek leadership actually feel that they are really left alone, and no one in the European Union really cares, actually, what would then still be the reason to actually prohibit or try to stop people from leaving? Which they still do now. Yeah? And one of the reasons why actually very few people, or not so many people, cross into Macedonia from Greece is because the Greeks are actually working together with the Macedonians. But if they would stop this, I think numbers would go up pretty. We don't know how much, and it most likely, it's very clearly will not be like last autumn, but it could be a very, very significant increase. We will have little Macedonia's asylum system would be swept in a few weeks, in several weeks. So if winter will come, we have then illegal crossers, people freezing to death, confrontation with police, with border guard. I think it would be actually pretty ugly. And eventually, many more people will come back to Central Europe than are coming now. I think that's also quite clear. Numbers we can discuss, but it will for sure go up. Now, politically, I think this would be devastating for those who have argued over the last year that it's possible to combine, bringing back control over our external borders and respect for the Refugee Convention and for European values. And it would boost those like Mr. Orban, who from the outset have actually argued that we should set human rights considerations aside, that we should suspend the Refugee Convention, that this is about an invasion, as it in September 2015. Now with elections looming, not only in Germany, but also in France and in the Netherlands next year, possibly even in Austria, who knows. I think the political momentum actually is quite likely to lie there with the anti-refugee, anti-European fire. Not a very promising perspective, I think. Now, finally, a few words on how could this be avoided. I think the default option is actually what I have lined out. I think if we just continue like this is actually probably the most likely thing to happen. What could we do to change this? 4 short points. I think it would be imperative to create the conditions to allow to send a strong asylum support mission to Greece. We need at least 200 specialists from the European Union, but also a structure where they can really work together with their Greek colleagues under a system which is functioning, which currently is not. And the essence of the most important thing is that we would need a mechanism where per day they could work off 200, 300, 350 cases. By this, in 2.5 months, actually the deadlock or the backlog of asylum seekers on the Greek islands would be cleared. I think this would actually be one of the game changers. And we would have to work hard on this, and I think it's not rocket science. We talk about 15,000 people. We don't talk about 800,000 or 300,000 or 90,000 like in Austria. We talk about 15,000 people, and we talk about the European Union with administrations and governments responsible for 500 million. Second, to create a mechanism of verification. So, I think we should not brush away the Greek concerns and just repeat that Turkey is a safe country for those refugees. No, let's take it seriously. Spell out precisely what Turkey actually has to do in order to be a safe country for those non-Syrians sent back in order to be able to apply for asylum. And I think it would be wise to actually condition then visa liberalization on meeting these criteria rather than on, then anti-terror law, which actually would not change very much because the same thing is written in the Turkish constitution, and even if the law is changed, I think we cannot fool ourselves to believe that by this the human rights situation in Turkey would now, change much for the better. It is bad, and it will remain like this for some time to come. I think it would also be helpful to appoint a senior special representative, a former prime minister, former president of the European Union, to actually, really push this, work together, coordinate between Ankara, Athens, Brussels, the member states. And finally, I think it would also be important to prepare on what we have promised actually to do, namely resettlement directly from Turkey. We have so far resettled less than 1,700 people directly from Turkey over these last 6 months. At the time, Gabriel was speaking of 350,000. Merkel was speaking about in the 100,000s. The Dutch government was speaking above 200,000. So we have managed 1,600 so far. I think that's definitely not good enough. So I think a lot is at stake, and I think you would be well advised to try to address it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your quite worrying analysis, but also for some recommendations for further steps. And now I would like to ask for introductory remarks Roland Freudenstein, who may add something also from the Brussels perspective.
Yeah. Radko, thank you so much, and thanks for being able to co-organize this. When I looked at the setup of speakers on this panel, and I saw that there are 2 Austrians and 1 German discussing a highly divisive topic in Prague, and one of them is named Benesh, actually. I thought that indeed this might be a recipe for disaster, or at least the beginning of a good joke. No, but indeed, in reality, what I found is that there's very little to disagree with to what has been said. So let me try to maybe give some added value by first looking at the whole picture and then giving you a couple of points where the European People's Party's thinking seems to be going, and there's been an emergency resolution on this topic of refugees and migration at the Congress of the EPP last year in October. But in the meantime, there has been some more thinking going on, and I can share a couple of ideas with you, emphasizing that this is not the final result. So generally, I think there's a couple of banalities maybe, but truths worth to be repeated. First of all, if we look at the numbers of displaced people in the world today, estimates go somewhere between 50 and 70 million people that are forcibly displaced. And we all know that many of these would like to come to Europe. Some of them are actually planning to come to Europe. Some have come to Europe, and many could imagine that. Last sentence on this one point: we cannot manage this alone. We need partners in the world. And that means particularly the countries of origin. Second obvious point, but nevertheless worth being repeated. We need a better coherence of the different policies of the European Union in this. So in other words, a development policy, foreign and security policy, relationship with NATO, as we saw in the Warsaw Summit, and last but not least, of course, asylum policy and the refugee, the ways to deal with the refugee crisis on the European level. All these must form a more effective whole. That was the second point. And the third one is, and this is probably the most difficult one, solidarity among the member states. And I can assure you right at this point that mistakes have been made in many places. Not least in Brussels, itself and by the European Commission, by my own country of origin, if I may say, Germany, but of course also in Prague, Budapest, Warsaw, and Bratislava, and in other places. I guess might go into more detail later on in this debate, but these are the 3 points that I'd like to emphasize in the beginning. Europe can't do this alone. We must have better coherence among different EU policy areas, and we have to have some better cooperation, and that begins with communication among the member states' governments. And now what could we imagine in future? I think, first of all, we need to seriously rethink asylum law and probably rework the respective EU directives on asylum and work on our notion of subsidiary protection, which at the moment is possible for whole groups of people, nationalities, religious groups, and so on. And I think our thinking goes in the direction to actually redefine subsidiary protection and base it exclusively on individual grounds. So each individual is looked at. Is there a reason to grant subsidiary protection? And then, in the consequence of that, political asylum. Because, frankly speaking, the Geneva Convention was made in different times. It was a result of World War II and the aftermath. And the numbers that we are dealing with today and that we may be dealing with in future are not comparable to the numbers that we dealt with as a consequence of World War II. So very simply, we have to rethink our interpretation of Geneva and probably make the consequent changes in EU legislation. Second, a recognition that rescue at sea does not necessarily mean automatic legal access to the European Union territory. Now, that's easily said. Actually, that would require some of the points that I'm going to come to after this. It would require having another place than EU territory to shelter these people. Very simply. But I think that's a very, very important point, and it's no sacrilege or violation of the basic principles and values on which the European Union is based to think about this. So the next point, and this is actually in connection to the question of what do we do after rescue at sea, I think we need to prepare plans. The member states and the European Commission should prepare plans for safe zones in which support, assistance, as well as protection are provided in regions of conflict and in transit countries outside of Europe. Again, this is very easily said, and I guess at some point it means military intervention in conflict areas. And you know that, looking at public opinion in most of our member states, that is for the moment excluded. But we have to at least start thinking and debating this point. Then, probably much easier than the two previous points, is a further development, improvement of information centers in countries of origin. And this goes also to the messaging that has already been mentioned. What messages do we send? What signals do we send to people that are potentially coming to the European Union? Very, very simply, information centers, warning of illegal entry into the European Union, trying to propose alternatives, and so on. Finally, in the long run, probably even more important than information centers are actual asylum and migration centers, are places where people can apply for asylum outside the European Union. This is probably the single most important step in the future and we're not even beginning to actually plan for this at the moment, but we need to. So that we do get to a situation where 5, 10, 15 years down the line, people can apply for asylum outside of the European Union. That may not remove entirely the attempts at illegal immigration, but I think, again, in terms of messaging, in terms of signaling, I think it would be a huge progress. So, if I have to sum up what went wrong over the last 12 months, without going into any detail, let me just say this. If we look at the two sides that are waging this debate on migration and refugees in Europe, and the two sides may be personified by, on the one hand, Angela Merkel, on the other hand, Viktor Orban, if I may say so.
Both members.
Members of the EPP, indeed. Yes, that's why I'm talking about it. You know. So if we have these two opposite positions, then I believe one side seems to be saying Europe's future is white and Christian, and the other one seems to be saying it's multi-ethnic and multi-religious. But I think both of these do not address the real problem, which is, if we asked who do we want to be in 20 years, the most important point is, will we still be an open society? And what both sides need to recognize is that, on the one hand, open society is based on the rule of law and liberal democracy. Don't play around with that. And the other side needs to recognize that, in fact, open borders, uncontrolled open borders, can come into conflict with open societies. That, if we do not manage to control the number of people who are coming to us from some of the most violent conflict zones in the world, our open society is in question as well. So, that's my dire request in this whole debate. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you very much. Maybe even without commenting or following on what you have mentioned, I will ask the co-panelists whether you would like to react to what was said. Before I will have some couple of questions, and then we will definitely open the floor to you in your audience. So, would you like to react or add anything?
There's now some certain agreement in Europe that more needs to be done to protect the borders, actually. But now also looking back from what we have seen over the last 12 months, actually, also happening in Brussels and so on, there were several meetings, events and so on taking place where it was even a problem to put the issue of the refugee crisis on the agenda of the meeting. So it was for a very long time some kind of approach, like not looking to the problem, actually try to look away. It will go along, actually, it will be solved one way or the other. But actually what has started last year, that's comparable with what you've seen 25 to 30 years ago in Europe with the change and the fall of the Iron Curtain, actually, and all the historical impact it had on Europe as a whole. So actually what has happened over the last 12 years was a new chapter in history of European history has been opened, and we are now writing each page of it, and it's our duty, it's our responsibility. And so we asked ourselves several times why it was so difficult for several institutions in Commission, in Europe as a whole, to realize the dimension of the challenge we are facing, and not trying to get everybody within the European Union into the boat for finding a common solution, a common contribution. Of course, there has been the ongoing discussion about relocation and the very different approaches actually, but what we've seen, especially the governments of Eastern and Central European countries, when we talk to them, that there was the will to contribute to the solution of the problem. And it's not also about relocation, it's about controlling our borders and to take back the responsibility for controlling our borders. And to some extent, my minister has been very critical about the deal with Turkey, it has been mentioned. We now invest 5 billion euros, 6 billion euros actually into this deal with Turkey, to a government, and we do not know whether it will work or won't work. It had some impact right now in reducing the crisis. We would say in Austria that the closing of the border across Greece and Macedonia had an even stronger impact in stopping the influx of refugees. My government was criticized for doing this in February and March of this year. Now it is European policy, and when you talk beside of the official meetings to several politicians, or my minister did, they all said, good you did it. It was good that you actually initiated this conference in Vienna, and so that was kind of the first step and the first attempt to, turn around actually the whole boat going into the wrong direction. But we really have to speed on now in protecting our own borders. And we need all European countries to contribute to this issue, and we also have to be clear about that we have to stop illegal migration. We have to help these people, but that doesn't have to mean that they are allowed to come to the European Union. We should do more and more for resettlement. We should do more and more regarding development projects in the regions all across Europe actually. That's actually what we should focus on, and we should be as clear as possible, as firm as possible in executing this kind of policy, because by doing this, Europe will become very, very unattractive for smugglers, and we will reduce the number of people risking their lives by trying to get over the Mediterranean Sea by about since 2014 and this year by about 10,000 people have died in the Mediterranean Sea by trying to cross the Mediterranean Sea illegally and coming to Europe actually. And with our politics over the last 2 years, we even, to some extent, it has been supported, and we need to stop this kind of wrong approach right now. We have to do it, we have to help outside the European Union, and we have to do this as firmly as possible. Regarding my government, actually, we have raised dramatically the amount of subsidies and projects we are doing with the development agencies, the Austrian development agencies, in the regions, actually. That's what we should focus on, and we just should do it, actually. There has been so much of talk about doing several things, but if we do not act as Europe as a whole, maybe next year we'll sit here again, talk about the same thing. Hopefully not.
Very good. Thank you very much. Would you like to comment or?
Maybe 2 points. One on Turkey as a partner, because you've mentioned it. I fully understand that it would be, how should I say, nicer if, I don't know, Switzerland would be east of Greece, you know? But it is Turkey, and I think we cannot change it. And I think when we look at how borders are effectively controlled, they are controlled with the other country on the other side as a partner. This is how actually effective border controls functions, be it between, I don't know, Finland and Russia, be it between Spain and Morocco, be it at a time when actually few people managed to come and cross from Libya to Italy, the time of Berlusconi when he struck a deal with Gaddafi, I think there is no other way, particularly if you have a sea border where the islands are just so close to the Turkish mainland. There is no now option in the Mediterranean between Greece and Turkey. Besides the fact that I also don't really think that this is a very desirable option. But I think the dependency on Greece. I mean, we are dependent regardless if we have to. Turkey will be sort of at the other side of the European Union external border, regardless what we do and what we don't do. And I think the only other option, I think Merkel has stressed this, and I think she knows it quite well, the only other way how you can effectively really close or control the borders so that no one really kind of crosses it without cooperation from the other side is a deadly. That is when you are actually prepared to shoot at people. I mean, I think in this country here also there was some experience of this, and not actually that long. And maybe a second remark on what you said on Orban and Merkel as sort of the two poles, Roland. I very much like what you said, you know, that the most important thing eventually is, will Europe be in 10 or 15 years an open society? I could not agree more fully. But I have maybe a slightly more pronounced view on how should I say, who is more supportive for an open society and who is less. With Orban, in September 2015, at his picnic, which he does every year in the autumn with some of his party friends, he actually said, "We are inundated with countless immigrants. There is an invasion, they break down fences, and it is clear to us all that they are not seeking refuge, they are not running for their lives." And what here? This is interesting. I think this brings us to the core what his agenda actually is. At the time already he said, if we step back from the whole issue and its specific features and conceptually reflect on what is happening, then we see that we have a huge opportunity. If we fight well in this debate to restore the prestige and appeal of national identity and Christian identity in opposition to the liberal identity. With this, yeah. Let's get rid of liberal Europe. For Orban, liberal Europe basically is everyone from a moderate social democrat to Angela Merkel, right? And I think he has been going so far that, to be a bit provocative now, I think he has actually, he is so out of step of actually the core values of Europe's conservative, or Europe's great conservative center-right parties, that I'm actually a bit at a loss to understand why actually he is still part of this group, why he's still allowed to be part of the EPP. I think the big danger we see, I mean, I understand that there is how should I say, he is one of the group, and I understand that there is an inherent, how should I say, drive to actually try to accommodate, to resolve this within the group. But I think he has actually drawn you so much down, or actually not down, but to the far right, that I actually feel that your actual core values are endangered by Viktor Orban.
Okay, thank you also for this provocative note. We are happy to have actually Hungarians here in the audience, so they can definitely react. And it was almost a direct question to you, so please go on.
Yeah, well, the good news is that for the EPP, that so many people from outside the party family are worried about our composition, our relation to our values, and so on. That's always good. First of all, don't think that this is an easy thing. I mean, if you just look at the factual situation in terms of numbers of member state governments, for example, that are still led by EPP politicians, there's not so many left, and Viktor Orban is clearly, the Hungary with Fidesz is clearly one of the most successful ones in electoral terms in the council, and so you do think twice as a political family whether you kick someone out. That's one thing. I mean, that's more on the technical side. But I mean, for example, I would also say that in terms of basic values, as you see them implemented or violated in government policies and legislation, whenever the Commission has protested at something that the Fidesz-led government in Hungary did, there was a negotiation, there was an arbitration, there was the attempt at coming to some kind of compromise. And that compromise may have been much closer to what Fidesz and Viktor Orban wanted in the beginning, but there was a compromise. This is, by the way, not the case with the Polish government led by Prawo i Sprawiedliwość and Mr. Kaczyński. I mean, who is not even a member of that government, but we all know. So, you know, there are different degrees of being in opposition to values. And yes, what he says at what you call the picnic, where it's actually a summer university of the Hungarian of a Hungarian ethnic minority organization in Romania. What Orban says there is certainly a provocation to many Europeans. It's a beacon of hope to others. It's something that we need to discuss with and debate about. But if he says something like this, I'm sorry, I mean, no political party family can take that as a basis for, initiating a political procedure to exclude a party from European party family. It's very easy from a think tank or journalist perspective to say, kick him out. Many political families, especially the two big ones, the EPP and the Socialists also, who, by the way, have Mr. Fico in their ranks, who talks about, only helping Christians, Muslims not being definitely not welcome in Slovakia, Mr. Ponta in Romania. I'm far from using this as the first argument. It's called actually whataboutism, and what about the other ones? I'm not evading your argument. I'm very much worried and concerned about this, but, sometimes people who are not working in or active in political parties need to understand how these organizations work. And there is a certain reality how they work, and there's a certain dynamics, an internal dynamics of political parties, and that makes it much more difficult to kick out someone than it looks from the outside.
Very good, thank you very much. Now I would like to move from politics maybe back to policy, and I think that the discussion was actually very interesting because it was emphasized that there has to be much more focus on the cooperation with the third countries and activities outside the European Union. And this is actually something which we at the European Value Think Tank are mentioning already for 1 year, that borders cannot be protected only at the borders, and certainly not only at just one side of the border. There has to be so the other side as well. And I think that what Roland mentioned in his introductory remarks, that actually open society can be endangered in some circumstances by open borders. And this is very much true. And we actually needed probably this painful 12 months in order to realize that and to have more serious discussion about what actually has to be done in order to protect open and liberal society. Anyway, I think that now is the time to open the floor to our participants, to the audience. We have a microphone, so if you have a question or a comment, you are very much welcome. You can direct your question at just one particular panelist, or have a general question. Please. So, Mr. Ambassador Fischer.
I have a question to Roland Frankenstein. Since many years in our strategic papers, we have seen written black on white that one of the threats to European space might be a flow of refugees coming in massive numbers. So we were not ignoring this potential. In Czech strategic documents, it was written in the very first time, maybe 20 or 15 years ago. My question mark is, how would you draft today's strategy papers for the years to come? Because there might be some additional highlight linked to threats coming from countries we spoke about. How would you recommend to work in policy field in order to prevent that it remains only on the paper and that there is a real action put into life, that those articles are really part of our strategic concepts and also forces that we have, not only in terms of military forces, but in terms of explaining to people why it is so important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maybe we may have another question or comment so that we can gather a couple of them. So please, in the first row. Ambassador.
Thank you, Patrick Ross. Well, Christoph, I don't think that you need to shoot people if you want to control the border. That's something was, without the support of the other sides, you hopefully can avoid. But you need to know what to do with those people who are not allowed to come in. That's my question to Roland now. That's why I asked this question. What you have said about the open society, which can't exist without rule of law and democracy.
Liberal democracy.
Liberal, of course.
Checks and balances.
Absolutely. Rule of law is one of the core values we have. And we had some rules. We know these rules. And we are not fully implementing them once we are challenged by something what we think is something even more than rules, is a moral imperative to help those who are in need. But those who are in need, do they really have a right to ask for asylum once they cross the border illegally? Shouldn't we really create, and again I'm coming to my question, what you have said about these safe zones outside of the European Union. Isn't it the most important task for us now to do it, to create these zones? All empires who were not able to control its neighborhoods were soon or later destroyed by its neighborhoods. And I think that this is something what is the most, from my perspective, the most important task for Europe to do it, together with the United States. You mentioned the intervention. Without that, it's probably impossible. Do you feel readiness in Europe to do it? To really use this huge money? Huge, this is now very popular word, especially in the US presidential campaign. Huge money, which we are paying to Turkey, to use them for controlling the border and creating, by our even military intervention, some safe zones outside of the European Union.
Very good. Thank you very much for your clear question, and we will collect also third one, and then we will answer.
Thank you. Mr. Freudenstein, you said there are 60 million replaced people in the world, and of course the European Union cannot take all those people. But my question is, the refugee problem is an international problem, and not only the European Union is encompass very rich states. There are other very wealthy states in the world too, like the United States, like Canada, like Japan. And so my question is it not time to negotiate also with other wealthy countries, even like the Gulf countries, like the Emirates, to have their part of the burden sharing, to give also financial support for refugees? I think it's difficult to understand that only the European Union should be responsible for 50 to 60 million replaced people.
Very well, thank you very much. Some of the questions were directed to Roland, but I think that they are more general, and also the other panelists, I would like them to reply, especially on the question of whether the European Union is ready, whether there is a political willingness also in your countries to actually invest financially, but also politically in terms of risky operations outside the European Union in order to create some kind of safe zones, and even to open asylum procedure outside. I mean, to open possibility to apply for asylum, which is also something which is proposed by the EPP paper. So first, Roland, please.
Yeah, to Ambassador Fischer. Did we know what was coming? I think Angela Merkel has been very, very frank and upfront on this, like 3 weeks ago in her speech in Bundestag, when she basically admitted that we should have seen it coming. Indeed. Maybe she didn't read enough analyses from the think tanks in the Czech Republic. No, but seriously, I do think that there were, all across Europe, there were people who were predicting that guys were having a problem. I mean, at least since 2013. You remember September 13, we had the first big disasters of people drowning. I mean, numbers of 50, 100, 150 people drowning in the Mediterranean. That was the time when people should have woken up. And there was a mini debate in the capitals and in Brussels about, okay, you know, what are we doing about this? Can we shelter them? And there was already a solidarity debate which went north-south at the time, because Italy and Greece were saying that, hey, where's your solidarity, other member states? You're not helping us sufficiently in coping with the influx that was much, much smaller than what we saw last year. So, yes, the writing was on the wall, and all you can do is, and that's the second part of your question, is, you know, improve our way of acting for the future. And that's, now I'm coming back to the 5 points that I listed up before in my first contribution. That's exactly the reaction to our mistakes of the last 3 years. You know, so we have to be a little bit more forward-looking. But that presupposes a spirit of cooperation which I still miss in the European Union today. And, you know, I may have seemed very critical of Chancellor Merkel, which I am, but I must say that compared to the other side of this debate, she is trying to talk, to communicate, and to find some kind of common ground where we can, how we can go further and go and you know, create these solutions. And it does not seem to me that the other side is reciprocating, that the other side is as constructive and as willing to cooperate, especially if the other side tries to utilize the whole topic for, you know, questions of shoring up domestic support, winning elections, looking good in the European context, instead of really proposing solutions. So much for that. Peter, you asked about the safe zones. Well, what else can I say? Then we have to start thinking and talking about it, and, you know, maybe convince more people in our own populations that this is, in the long run, this is the only way forward. And that the alternative to that is indeed numbers of migrants that we cannot cope with if we want to keep open societies inside the European Union. I can only say that leadership is demanded. You know, that's always the last word you could say. We need more leadership. You know, complaining we have weak leaders today. You know, I know it sounds cheap, but it's the only thing I can come up with here. And then the point about the refugee problem being international and getting other partners, sir, absolutely correct. And certainly the Gulf states are among those that have been largely under the radar so far, but they cannot remain there. And, I'm sure that our diplomats are trying to convince them that they have to do more. But if you look at the sheer numbers, like rich oil-rich states in the Middle East they are actually hosting and sheltering, it sounds ridiculous. That's all I can say. We certainly have to reinforce our efforts not only with the countries of origin in trying to get them to re-accept people whose asylum application has been rejected, but also with the countries in the neighborhood of the countries of origin.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask our other panelists to react, and especially to respond, if I may ask, concerning this political readiness to really invest in creating safe zones, or even go further and creating this procedure for applying the asylum website.
Well, basically, first of all, I have to say our country is a neutral country, so actually there are some kind of legal limitations, confinements regarding what we are simply allowed to do when it comes to robust intervention and so on. But so far, actually, you can be sure we have been going through our constitutional laws and everything and asking ourselves again and again, how far can we go actually? As for instance, right now, our government, it was a very controversial discussion in Austria, for instance, decided by about 3 weeks ago that we will contribute Army Special Forces to the Mediterranean mission, which will be enlarged within the next months actually. And there was a lot of discussion whether we can do it or not. So basically, what we can do based on our legal framework, of course, our government is willing actually to do. But besides the fact of the safe zones, I would like to mention two other things. Well, first of all, we need to stop the conflict in Syria and Iraq. And one way, actually, we have to find a peaceful solution for this. There have been ongoing meetings also in Vienna by the diplomats. It's about communicating, it's about trying to find a way out. That's maybe the one main issue also which would need to be addressed more strongly by the European Union. And then there's also a very practical aspect of the whole discussion about illegal migration to Europe. When there are asylum seekers who are not allowed to stay, and they have to return to the countries of their origin, they need some kind of certificate by the states they're coming from for returning. And in many cases, and then I suppose in Germany it will be the same discussion, the embassies and the countries do not give these kind of certificates to these people who have a negative, who are not allowed to stay in the European Union, are not allowed to return to the countries of origin. Completely insane. So they live like submarines actually all across Europe, and no one actually knows what to do. So that's one practical issue that needs to be addressed. And so the European Union itself has to negotiate agreements with these states.